Avengers Endgame. And yeah, this is like, the big grand finale of phase 3 and the Infinity Saga. Right off the bat, we kind of have like the characters reeling from the events of Infinity War, where, Thanos had the snap and then wiped out half the universe. The whole cold open with Hawkeye, doing like archery with his daughter. And then, he's like turning around, like talking to like with his family about, like, hey, what do you want in your hot dog? And all this stuff. He turns back around and then, his daughters fade away. He like runs around the barn area looking for her, and then goes to like the picnic table and sees like his wife and 2 sons disappear as well, which like really is like good motivator for his scene when he's reintroduced later on in Japan, where he has like that sword fight with that kind of mob boss. I know that was like a theme that the producers and the writers wanted to have. Them being fathers themselves. It's like, what would you do if you lost your entire family, lost your kids? You'd be kind of self-destructive as well. So Hawkeye goes off the walls and becomes the sort of like Ronin character, which is explained later on. But yeah, it really just like sets the tone. I think something that I really appreciate about this movie is that it takes its time. Some people were critical of Infinity War about like how it was like really relentless and there was just like nonstop action, and you don't really have like time for the characters to breathe, which is understandable. There's like between Infinity War and Endgame, Infinity War definitely has a lot more action throughout, and just like a couple character moments, like quiet moments between the characters. But since it was like a heist movie that was inspired by 1990s smash and grab type heist movies, like Out of Sight or something. But yeah, with this one, especially like the first hour, is just a little bit more somber, a little bit more kind of slower in tone, but which is not a bad thing at all. It kind of like it takes its time to build up, and then like the Avengers eventually reuniting, and then having this plan to like go to Titan to find the Infinity Stones, defeat Thanos, and then kind of reverse the snap, and to bring everybody back. They storm Thanos' like retirement home, like they cut off his arm that has the gauntlet on it, and then Rocket flips it over and they see that like all the Infinity Stones have been disintegrated, and they're asking like, where are the stones? What'd you do with them? And he says like, I used the stones to destroy the stones. I am inevitable. Now the work is done. I thought that was like really cool twist. It's like, oh shoot, now what are we gonna do? Because I know like the Russos and Kevin Feige and like the writers, like they talked with one of the producers. Her name was like Trin Tran, and she was just frustrated. She was like, why don't you just like kill him off? And then the writers got really inspired by that, so it would really like make the situation even more dire, where they kind of have this hope at the very beginning that they're gonna defeat Thanos and get the Infinity Gauntlet and like reverse the snap and bring everybody back. But then it's just like, oh man, now what do we do? And then Thor slices off Thanos' head, and then the whole reference to Infinity War is like, it's like, what'd you do? It's like, I went for the head. And then kind of walks out the barn. They're all kind of like, what do we do now? And then it fades to black, and then we have the 5 years later caption. And I think everyone in the audience was like, what? So yeah, I thought that was like a really interesting twist for sure. And then, as the story goes on, it just shows like very quiet scenes of, like Captain America and like that kind of group therapy with the other survivors, talking about their experiences of like losing people and, how they have to move on. And, Captain America saying, it's like, you gotta move on. But even like you can see in his face, like he doesn't even believe it himself. Another thing that I really appreciate about this movie is that it really focuses on the 6 Avengers, where all of them are kind of dealing with their form of grief in a way, where Captain America and Black Widow kind of like bargaining in a way where there's like, oh, maybe there's still hope, and we can still have these missions around the galaxy. Like they're having missions with War Machine and Captain Marvel and Okoye and Rocket, of like different missions across the galaxy to find some hope. But even they're kind of like struggling with that. You have Tony Stark, who feels like acceptance, and Hulk as well. They feel acceptance. Tony Stark married Pepper Potts, and then they have their daughter Morgan, and he's trying to have like this life of retirement. And then Hulk has this whole kind of like resolution of having this balance between he put the brains and the bronze together. So he has like Professor Hulk persona now, and then you have the other characters who are kind of like off the deep end. Thor, now he's like Fat Thor, Lebowski Thor, which I thought was pretty funny. I know like when I saw it in theaters, like everyone's kind of like shocked where Rocket and Hulk kind of go to his place in New Asgard, and then he kind of turns around and he's revealed to be Fat Thor. Everyone's like, everyone's shocked about that, but he feels like he's a failure. Like he should have went for the head the first time before Thanos did the snap, and he feels like really responsible for that. So he's like off the deep end. And then the opposite, where Clint Barton is feeling anger, so he's taking out that anger by like taking out these different like mobs in Japan and in like Mexico and all these other places, and kind of going off the deep end. So yeah, I really appreciate that. It really kind of comes back full circle to like the first Avengers movie, where it's about those 6 characters coming together to fight this evil. Where now it's like these 6 characters are like surviving, and like what they do after this big evil has won, and the steps they take to figure out what's going on. But then you have the whole twist of the rat sculling across like the dashboard of the van that was introduced in Ant-Man the Wasp, of Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne and Hank Pym and Janet, putting that kind of quantum realm technology within the van. So now it's it's like you can have like the quantum realm technology like on the go. But at the end of that movie, he gets sent into the quantum realm to kind of get like the Pym particles and all that. And then after Thanos has a snap, Janet, Hope, and Hank get disintegrated, so he's trapped within the quantum realm. Well, 5 years goes by, outside the quantum realm. Inside it's just been 5 hours. And then when the rat skulls across the dashboard, press the button, he gets launched out, and then he realizes like, hey, what's going on? What's happening? And then he realizes that it's been 5 years, half the population has been disintegrated, and the survivors have been aged 5 years. And then when he goes to his house and sees Cassie Lang, she's 5 years older, he's like obviously devastated that he missed 5 years, and he tries to figure out what's going on. So then he eventually goes to Captain America and Black Widow, and then kind of starts the ball rolling to kind of get people recruited onto this whole time heist idea of like using the quantum realm to go back in time, gather all the Infinity Stones again, and then do the snap again, and then bring everybody back. So that's kind of like the rest of the first half. And then eventually Act 2 is like all the time heist. They finally recruited Tony Stark, who eventually creates the machine that creates the time travel. They recruit the Hulk, which is another funny scene of him in the shop, and then talking with Ant-Man, and then the fans coming in, they're like, oh, you guys are Hulk fans, it's okay, I'm Ant-Man, like who? And all that. They eventually recruit Thor after his whole funny scene of being Fat Thor, playing Fortnite with Korg and Meek. Black Widow recruits Hawkeye after his whole kind of sword battle in Japan. So you have like the original 6 Avengers, and then the other surviving members, Nebula, War Machine, Rocket, and then eventually have like Act 2 is the whole time heist where like they're doing the whole plan. I think something that I was really like appreciate about this movie is like the fact that they keep kind of bouncing between different timelines, and you kind of see something that the Russos and the writers themselves like were wanting to do is kind of see the same movie from like a different point of view. So you have Captain America, Iron Man, Ant-Man, and Hulk revisiting the first Avengers movie, and seeing like that different perspective of like the Battle of New York, and them trying to find Loki's scepter, which gets intercepted by Rumlow and Sitwell, which Captain America eventually intercepts, because he says it's like, don't worry, Hail Hydra, which is like kind of like a double reference. Like not only is it a reference to the fact that this is like the future Captain America who knows that Hydra was inside S.H.I.E.L.D. the whole time, but also a reference to like the comic books where they kind of do like a what if of like if Captain America was recruited by Hydra. So I thought that was really cool. So they intercept the scepter, but then they try to go after the Tesseract, but then the Hulk being the Hulk, he knocks it out of Tony Stark's hand, and then Loki grabs it, and then it kind of spins off into the Loki show. And then Tony Stark and Captain America have to go back to like 1970s to the base camp, and then not only do they have to get the Tesseract, but also have to get the new Pym particles. So then Tony Stark gets the Tesseract, interacts with his dad, kind of has that whole resolution of because him being a father, and then having that kind of awkward relationship with his own father, which gets kind of resolved in this one, I thought was really cool. And then Steve Rogers gets the Pym particles, sees Peggy Carter in the distance, so that kind of reignites that passion that he has that was established in First Avenger, and then kind of gets brought up in like Winter Soldier when he's interacting with old Peggy, and then in Civil War where she actually passes away. So that kind of sets up the events for the end of Endgame. And then, Hulk is interacting with the Ancient One, and then kind of gets the time stone from her. She's like wearing it, the Eye of Agamotto, and then tells him that it's like, okay, well, if you do remove these time stones from here, you have to bring him back. And then Hulk obviously gives that whole promise that he will. So they have those Infinity Stones, and then you have War Machine and Nebula going after the Power Stones. So they go back to 2014, punch out Star-Lord, and then, go into that tomb and then get the Power Stone. But then as soon as they try to go back to the present, Nebula kind of gets intercepted, like her whole wiring gets messed up, and then, she's kind of like, passes out and then gets kidnapped by 2014 Thanos and Gamora to figure out like what's going on. And then, they have the whole switcheroo with 2014 Nebula going back to the present instead to summon Thanos' ship for the final battle. But then meanwhile, you have Rocket and Thor going back to the Thor Dark World era, 2013, and extracting the reality stone from Jane Foster, which we don't see because we don't really get like how it goes from like a liquid to a stone, which they kind of joke about in the movie, because I know originally they weren't really wanting the ether to be a stone, but then as time went on, Kevin Feige really wanted these kind of different Easter eggs to be stones. So like the scepter became the Mind Stone, and then the ether became the Reality Stone, and so on and so forth. And even like the Power Stone wasn't supposed to be the Power Stone; it was supposed to be like a completely different stone. But then they, in post production, they changed it to like a purple tint to make it into the Power Stone. So I thought that was pretty funny how that kind of continuity all worked out. Even with like the Infinity Gauntlet, because there's like an Easter egg in the first Thor movie of like the Infinity Gauntlet. It's all like assembled with all the stones inside of it, and then they realize, oh shoot, they can't have the Infinity Gauntlet like already assembled. So in Thor Ragnarok, when Hela breaks into the kind of like a treasure chamber, she's like fake, and then throws off the side, and it gets destroyed. And then we realize that the actual Infinity Gauntlet is the one that was created by Eitri that gets introduced in Infinity War. So they get the Reality Stone, and then of course the tragic scene of Clint and Natasha going to Vormir to figure out like where the Soul Stone is, and then they meet up with Red Skull, who survived from the first Avengers movie, but after getting like sucked up in that portal after holding the Tesseract, they realize that in order to get the Soul Stone, they have to trade a soul for a soul. So they have the whole fight of like who's going to sacrifice themselves, and then Clint kind of goes off the side, but then Natasha grabs onto him, attaches him to the harness, so then he's like all stuck on there, and then he grabs Natasha's hand, and then Natasha's like, let me go, and then like Clint's like, no, don't do it, and then she pulls herself away, falls off the side of the cliff, dies, and then Clint wakes up in like that kind of like ocean area with the Soul Stone. Then everyone kind of returns to the present, and they realize like, Clint, where's Nat? They realize that Natasha sacrificed herself for the Soul Stone, and then Clint and Captain America are saying that they can't let her die for nothing. They have to make this chance count. And then Cap's like, yeah, we will. So then Iron Man, Hulk, and Rocket make their own Infinity Gauntlet, put the stones in, and then since the Infinity Stone are mostly gamma radiation, the Hulk is the only one who can kind of resist that the most. So then he does the snap, and they realize like, oh, do we do it? But then in the next room, Nebula summons Thanos' ship, comes in, destroys the Avengers complex, and then we have that whole final battle, of the small group of Avengers going against Thanos, and half the Avengers are like under the compound, like as it's like coming down, like they're drowning, all this stuff. Like the other half of the Avengers are like going after Thanos, and like obviously he wipes them out, one by one. He gets rid of like Iron Man, gets rid of Thor drops his hammer, and then Captain America summons Mjolnir, which is like a really epic moment, has this whole battle, but then Mjolnir is like knocked out of his hand, he gets the shield, that gets destroyed by his whole like Thanos' spinning sword thing. Thanos summons his entire army, and you have Captain America still, being the soldier, putting on like half of his shield, I can do this all day, his whole mentality, right when you think, all hope is lost, then you suddenly hear on your left, turns around, portal shows up, and then we get into that epic scene of like, one by one, the Avengers showing up again. You have like Falcon, you have the Guardians, you have Doctor Strange, you have Spider-Man, the Ice Guardians, the Wakandans, like all coming in, Bucky, Groot, all them. And like, I just remember being in the theater and like everyone was just like cheering every time a new Avengers character came in. So that was definitely very epic for sure. And then obviously the whole final battle, Captain America like, Avengers, assemble. And then they all just run, and they have the whole clash. They kind of have like the whole kind of like hot potato of Clint having the Infinity Gauntlet, trying to get away from like the 2014 Nebula, and they have a whole confrontation because, as the story went on, Nebula kind of had her whole character arc of going from evil to being good, and then kind of convinces 2014 Gamora to fight against Thanos and Nebula, so they have the whole redemption arc. and present day Nebula shoots 2014 Nebula. Clint gets the Infinity Gauntlet away, passes it to Black Panther. Black Panther passes it to Spider-Man. Spider-Man passes it to like Captain Marvel. Like they have their whole battle. Despite how powerful Captain Marvel is, she's not powerful enough. And eventually Thanos gets the gauntlet, puts it on, and Iron Man swoops in, has their whole battle, and then secretly he removes the stones from the gauntlet. So then when you think Thanos is like, I am inevitable, and like goes in for the snap, like nothing happens, and he's like, what the heck? And then they cut to Iron Man, and then you see the stones kind of forming onto his glove for the Iron Man suit, and he's like, and I am Iron Man. Snap, all Thanos' army disintegrates, the battle is won, but then at the cost of Tony Stark's life. So I think it's a really good full circle moment where, this whole MCU started with Iron Man saying, I am Iron Man, starting the whole, superhero phenomenon and everything. And, I think like it's very poetic. The last thing that Tony Stark says is, I am Iron Man. And I know like the Russo Brothers originally and the writers originally didn't want him to have a line, but, the editor, Jeffrey Ford, said, I think you should have a line. So they have him say, I am Iron Man. And they had a whole pickup shoot of him saying that. And I think it was also really cool that at the very end, originally he was supposed to kind of maybe like say some lines when Pepper and Peter and War Machine walk up to him. But then Robert Downey Jr. was like no, I don't want to say anything. I want my last line to be I am Iron Man. And then that's it. Like, I guess, he does mutter like Pep. But then after that, Iron Man dies, gives his life, sacrifices himself. And, now the universe is saved. And now the Avengers can kind of live on in their own lives, and obviously we'll get that rolls on to Phase 4. But at least for this one, I think Endgame was definitely just like a good just wrap up and finale for the Infinity Saga. And really in my mind, I really feel like it's like the definitive ending of the MCU. Like we'll see what happens with Phase 5. I mean, you already know my thoughts on Phase 4 if you've seen my previous videos. Very hit or miss phase where there's not really a lot of consistency. So I hope for Phase 5 they kind of get the ball rolling with kind of connecting the dots a little bit more, and hopefully like in King Dynasty and Secret Wars, things will kind of get wrapped up in a way. But for this one, for Phase 3, I really feel like this is like the definitive ending. All the characters get wrapped up. Captain America, returns the stones to their different timelines, so then everything's all resolved. And then, he eventually goes back to the 1940s and finally has his dance with Peggy Carter that he promised her at the end of the first Avenger. And so I thought that was really cool tie up to that storyline where, he finally gets to retire, because his whole character that was established in that movie was, he's very, he's a soldier, he's willing to sacrifice his life, he's willing to, give everything up in his personal life for the cause. And, his whole arc is to, instead of like, fighting for others, he has to, fight for himself eventually, and it's okay that, he's selfish for a little bit, and, he has his own wants and needs. So, he retires, has his dance with Peggy Carter, and then present day old Cap passes on the shield to Sam Wilson, and then, that kind of spins off into Falcon and Winter Soldier. And then, the other characters, like Thor, realizing that, he has to be who he wants to be instead of like what others expect him to be. And then, he kind of passes on the mantle to Valkyrie to be the kind of the king of Asgard. He kind of rolls off with the Guardians and, becomes Asgardians of the Galaxy. And we all know what happens in Thor Love and Thunder, which if you want to see my thoughts on that, watch my review for that one. And then, Clint Barton is free to retire and, goes back to his family and like reunite with them. So that's a good full circle moment. And then, the other Avengers, like Von Maximoff and all of them are free to do their own like Disney Plus spin-offs and all that. But if Endgame were to be like the last movie, like I would be totally fine with that. I feel like it really just kind of cements the ending a little bit more, and kind of just brings more like importance to this movie as being the definitive ending for the Infinity Saga, and in my opinion for the MCU. So yeah, I really appreciate the Russos for sticking the landing. I know like this was subtitled like Mary Lou, because like Mary Lou was like a Olympian, I think she's like a gymnast or something, and she had to like stick the landing, so they kind of subtitled this movie Mary Lou because they had to stick the landing with Endgame. And I appreciate it for sure, and I think a lot of other people do. I know people probably have like their nitpicks and stuff with this movie, but I really enjoy it. There's a reason why it's like the second highest grossing movie of all time, $2.9 billion at the box office, because people just keep wanting to go see that movie again and again and see the definitive ending of these characters. So I definitely appreciate it for sure.